You are listening to Housekeepers Chat by the United States Department of Agriculture from 1926. Disclaimer: this is read from a historic archive document. Do not assume content reflects current scientific knowledge, policies, or practices. This broadcast was aired 26th of October 1926.
I had a sewing party at my home yesterday afternoon. An informal party with 5 neighbors as my guests. They brought their sewing, and while we sewed, we talked. I like sewing parties. They're so much more satisfactory than bridge. I never could talk and play bridge at the same time, and it's always the bridge that suffers. Whenever I play bridge, someone in the crowd is sure to mention a new sandwich filling or an irresistible tea cake. Then I forget who played last, and whether hearts or spades are trump, and my partner treats me with dignified and frigid reserve the rest of the evening. Just as if I'd lost the game on purpose. But a sewing party is different. After you find out what the Wembleys named the twins, and how much the Joneses paid for their new car, you can settle down to business and exchange ideas. We had a regular experience meeting yesterday. Mrs. Jane had done her shopping in the morning. She was quite set up over her latest purchase, a self-wringing floor mop, which saves wear and tear on the hands. I think she said the mop cost her $1.25 anyhow. It was quite reasonable. She had also bought a combination grater and vegetable slicer and an egg slicer. The egg slicer cost 10 or 15 cents. It cuts the egg in neat, uniform slices, makes them look very attractive when used as garnishes. The other ladies, not to be outdone by Mrs. Jane, were soon listing their favorite kitchen pets. Mrs. Rose vowed she couldn't get along without 2 glass measuring cups, 1 cup for measuring dry ingredients and 1 for wet ingredients. She wouldn't think of keeping house without a small brush for greasing baking pans. The handiest article in my kitchen, Mary Alice told us, is a pair of scissors. They stay in the kitchen too, and I always know where to find them. I use scissors for shredding lettuce, cutting string beans, cutting out grapefruit, cores, and so forth. Other kitchen favorites of mine are an asset of aluminum measuring spoons, a milk bottle opener, and a small egg beater. The egg beater is small enough to fit into a cup and comes handy when I want to beat up just 1 egg or a small amount of cream. I have a spatula, too, and a pair of tongs. The tongs keep my arms from being burned with them. I take baked potatoes from the oven. Mrs. Smith had discovered a way of converting her tea kettles into a double boiler by using a small pan which fits into the top of the tea kettle. She has a long-handled dustpan too, which saves stopping. I couldn't let my guests get ahead of me, so I mentioned my grapefruit knife of stainless steel. I use the knife when preparing oranges too, and other acid fruits. I was learning so many helpful hints from my guests that I finally asked each of them to contribute at least 1 practical bit of information for today's program. They objected at first, said they were only ordinary housekeepers and didn't know as much as the specialists in the Bureau of Home Economics. But I insisted, and before long, our homemakers roundtable had turned out some valuable information. Mrs. Jane had a new recipe for a short method of cooking cabbage. 5-minute cabbage, she calls it. I wrote it down because I want to add to it to the radio cookbooks. If you have your pencils ready, I'll give you the recipe for 5-minute cabbage. Shred the cabbage up finely. Cook it just about 2 minutes in hot milk, half as much milk as you have cabbage. Then for each quart of cabbage, add a cup of cream or rich milk with 2 tablespoons of butter blended with 2 tablespoons of flour. Season with salt and pepper, cover, and boil just 3 or 4 minutes. The result is a crisp vegetable, delicate and delicious. Mrs. Jane's 5-minute cabbage is the best recipe I've heard of for cooking cabbage without destroying the vitamins. Mary Alice said she couldn't add a thing to our round table. She doesn't do much cooking, and besides, she'd spent the morning chasing fleas and was too disgusted to talk about practical information. Fleas, we said, with one voice. Where did you get fleas? "It was this way," explained Mary Alice. "Johnny's teacher has impressed on him the fact that he must be kind to animals. Yesterday afternoon, while I was gone, he found a sorry-looking mongrel pup. From what I could gather, Johnny invited the dog into the living room and showed him a pleasant time. I wouldn't say that the dog had all the fleas now extant, but he had more than his share." "What did you do with the room that was infested with the fleas?" I asked Mary Alice. "I took the rugs outdoors, cleaned them, and sprayed them with benzene. Gasoline would have done just as well. I was very careful, of course, since benzene, like gasoline, is inflammable. Then I washed the floor, which is painted, with soap suds. I was especially careful about the cracks between the boards and along the baseboards. I sprayed the floor with benzene. I could have used gasoline. Since I had the rugs out, I decided I might as well give them a thorough cleaning." "I didn't see your rugs on the line," remarked Mrs. Jane. "No, I don't hang my rugs on the line, or shake them by the corners. I'm afraid such practices may break the threads or loosen the bindings, and then the ends will ravel. Yesterday I spread the rugs on the dry grass in the backyard, right side down. Then I teeped them with a flat carpet beater, swept them, turned them over, and swept them again. Since I had the rugs out, I decided I might as well clean the woodwork in the room. It's varnished, you know. I cleaned it with an oiled cloth. Around the doorknobs where the woodwork was rather dingy, I washed it with a cloth well wrung out of a light suds made with a neutral soap. Finally, to revive the finish, I rubbed the woodwork with a cloth, sprinkled with linseed oil, since I was out of furniture polish." "What became of the dog?" asked Mrs. Jane. "Oh, Johnny's still being kind to it. He bought some stock dip and got rid of the fleas. I don't mind dogs, but I detest fleas." "While we're talking about my house," continued Mary Alice, "remember my sitting room? It's small, with a dark blue wainscoting 3/4 of the way up, and white wall and ceiling above. The furniture is dark, and I have 2 brown wicker chairs. My problem was to select curtains for the room. I knew, when we moved into the house, that dark blue should never be used for the walls of a small room. That I couldn't change the color of the walls right then, so I made curtains of theatrical gauze with bands of cretonne on it. I got fairly gay cretonne, that of good conventional design, with deep, rich colors. There's a valance of the cretonne across the top. The curtains aren't so glaring as white curtains would be, and they allow the greatest amount of light to enter. I didn't use over-draperies. I could not find anything that looked well with the dark blue walls and the white ceiling. Besides, over-draperies would have cut out too much light. Next week, the sewing club is going to meet Aunt Mary Alice's house, so we can see her new curtains. Mrs. Smith, who is sending 3 youngsters to school this winter, said she couldn't add much to our symposium. I don't know anything new, she insisted. I'm not clever at fixing over rooms. All I can do is cook, and only simple things at that. Just what we want, I explained. You might tell us what you had for dinner last night. If it sounds good, I'll broadcast the menu. Mrs. Smith told us then that she had a lamb stew with vegetables, boiled flaky rice, and a salad quickly made from lettuce and mayonnaise dressing combined with chili sauce. Chocolate pie was the dessert. Here's how she made the lamb stew and made it not just ordinary lamb stew, but one that looked attractive and tasted different. I will give you the ingredients first. Ready to write them down? 2 pounds of lamb, 2 tablespoons fat, 3 cups diced rutabaga turnips, a ½ cup sliced onions, a green pepper chopped, salt and pepper. Wipe the meat with a damp cloth, cut into small pieces, brown the sliced onion in the hot fat, roll the meat in flour, then brown it in the hot fat. Be careful, though, not to scorch it, or you will spoil the delicate flavor. Then put the browned meat and onion in a kettle, rinse the frying pan with water, and pour this liquid over the meat and onion. Add enough more water to make about 1.5 quarts in all. Then simmer the meat for about 1 hour. Then add the diced turnips, chopped green pepper, and the seasoning. Cook for 20 to 30 minutes longer. If the stew is not thick enough, mix together a little flour in cold water this in, and continue stirring for about 5 minutes. The stew is likely to stick to the kettle and scorch after the thickening is added. I chose rutabaga turnips for my stew, added Mrs. Smith, because they are such a pretty yellow color. Rutabaga turnips are said to be especially rich in vitamins, too. I asked Mrs. Smith to tell me how she made chocolate pie, but she insisted that everybody has a recipe for chocolate pie. I hope she is right. Perhaps I can persuade her to give it another time. To repeat the menu: lamb stew, boiled flaky rice, lettuce salad with a tart, spicy dressing, and chocolate pie. If you listened in all week, you may have copies of these menus and recipes to add to your radio cookbook. And don't forget to tell me what you think of the recipes.
This broadcast was researched and produced by BreakAway Empire LLC.